Hello everybody. This is lesson 23 of the lecture Macroeconomics. I will discuss the slides 164 to 179 of chapter 4, the Keynesian model. In this lesson we will discuss the long-run implications of the assumptions of the Keynesian model. As section 4.1 of this chapter has shown, in reality it takes around 1 year until firms start to adjust their prices. Within this time span, prices are typically constant. When firms adjust their prices, they will do so according to the current degree of capacity utilization. For example, when a rise in demand for goods has caused an economic boom so that production lies above full employment GDP, firms will notice that an increase in prices will help to increase their profits. So let's go back to the production module of the Keynesian model to analyze this situation. This is the production module of the Keynesian model. We have the production function here, and in the diagram below the production function we have the labor market. Currently, GDP demand is large enough to cause a labor demand that helps to completely absorb the supply of labor given the real wage rate, typically determined by trade unions and employer associations based on a wage contract, a collective bargaining contract. Now, if you are in a boom situation, demand grows above this level, for example to this level, and this higher demand for goods is then transformed into a higher demand for labor necessary to produce these goods. To get these additional workers, private companies have to pay a larger wage, because given the old wage only this amount of workers is supplied. So the wage will grow typically in a boom situation until all the workers needed to produce this additional amount of GDP can be employed. In the real world, this takes typically place in terms of overtime shifts, and to make workers want to provide the necessary additional labor for these overtime shifts, it is necessary to pay overtime premiums. So the wage on average will grow in such boom situations. However, real world companies need not only workers, they need also additional other production factors like natural resources, metal, minerals or energy. And therefore, in such a boom situation, total demand for these production factors grows also, such that their prices will also grow. So there are a couple of reasons why prices grow in a boom situation when all companies try to produce more than in a normal total market equilibrium with full employment. This is the explanation why we have higher production costs in a boom situation. So, if after 1 year firms consider an adjustment of their prices and they are in a boom situation, they have higher production costs, and therefore they will hand over these higher production costs to their customers, and therefore they will increase their prices. As a result, makes sense to assume that in a boom period, firms will in the long run increase their prices. If we are in the opposite situation, if we are in a recession, a decline in the demand for goods has caused production of firms to lie on a level that is below full employment GDP. And as we will see in such a situation, profit maximizing firms will have an incentive to decrease their prices. So let me also go back to the production module of the Keynesian model and describe once again this situation in a recession of an economy. In a recession, total demand for goods has fallen to a lower level than necessary to produce full employment GDP. As a result, demand for goods has fallen on a level where demand for labor is lower than necessary to have full employment. We call such a situation Keynesian unemployment. In such a situation, firms will dismiss workers or will not re-engage new workers for older workers that retire, such that the number of workers decreases and as a result labor costs decrease also. In the initial situation, total labor costs were equal to this large rectangular area. Now, with Keynesian unemployment, the amount of workers falls to this level times the wage rate, so we have only this small rectangular area as the total wage costs paid to the workers. Additionally, in the real world economy, we have also a lower demand for other production factors like energy or raw materials, and typically in recession periods, the prices of these raw materials and energy costs do also fall. So in a recession, we have typically falling prices for production factors. And that means that private companies have now a leeway to lower their prices. So, in a recession, firms will typically have lower production costs and therefore they can normally increase their profits if they decrease their prices. So as a result, we can say that in the boom period, firms have an incentive to increase their prices, while in a recession situation, firms have an incentive to decrease their prices in the long run when they start to adjust prices. In the following, we will analyze what happens if the economy is in a recession and firms start to adjust their prices. Before we do so, let me recapitulate that this behavior we have just discussed is quite general under various microeconomic market conditions. So the most important market conditions that we have in reality are, on one side, perfect competition, and on the other side, monopolistic competition. So firms which operate in markets with perfect competition maximize their profits, as we know, by adjusting their prices to their marginal costs. In a boom situation, they increase their production quantities, consequently, their marginal costs grow. Therefore, when they adjust their prices in the long run under Keynesian conditions, they will therefore raise their prices. In a recession, they do the opposite. In a recession, they have reduced their production quantities, consequently their marginal costs will fall, and when they adjust their prices in the long run, they will therefore lower their prices in a recession. Now, in reality, we know that many firms do not operate under perfect competition, but under monopolistic competition. So this means they have a certain leeway to practice markup pricing. For example, because they have a brand name and their customers are willing to pay an additional price just for the brand name. So their prices will typically be always somewhat higher than their marginal costs. Now, in a boom situation, demand grows stronger such that these firms can in the long run increase their profits by raising their markups. And in a recession, demand becomes weaker such that these firms can in the long run increase their profits by reducing their markups to stabilize the demand for their goods. So it's actually the same behavior. In both type of market situations, firm has an incentive to increase their prices in a boom situation and decrease their prices in a recession. Therefore, it makes sense that we use this assumption now to analyze price adjustment in the long run in the Keynesian model. As we will see, a change of the price level will affect the economy in the same way as it did in the neoclassical model. So in the long run, the Keynesian model becomes just like the neoclassical model. The difference lies only in the short run. Okay, but let's first do the analysis. Let's start with the capital market, because that's the market where price adjustment will have the primary effect. This is just like in the neoclassical model also. If you start with an equilibrium in the capital market, then we have real supply of credit, savings supply plus real money supply of the central bank equals investment credit demand plus money credit demand in real terms. Now, if firms reduce their prices, this price here will become smaller, since the price is in the denominator of this fraction, which represents the real value of money. This means that this fraction gets larger. So if the price goes down, because we are in a recession, the real value of money becomes larger as it was before. Well, this value gets smaller, downward arrow, and therefore this fraction gets larger, upward arrow. Now we would have, in the first logical second, a larger credit supply than credit demand. But we know that excess supply causes the interest rate to fall, and if the interest rate falls, then investment credit demand gets larger. And this larger investment credit demand restores the equilibrium on the capital market. But now we have a larger investment credit demand, and firms will use these additional credits to buy investment goods. Consequently, this adjustment of the capital market will now affect the market for goods. But that's something I would like to analyze with the help of our diagram, the demand side module of the Keynesian model. So when the price level of goods decreases from P1 to P2, this means that the value of total credit supply gets larger. So let's assume that this decrease of the price level causes an increase of the total credit supply just by the length of one little quad. So this will be our new total credit supply, consisting of the old savings supply of households plus the new real value of money supply. Now this additional supply of credits causes in the first logical segment excess supply, which then causes the interest rate to fall. So this means, well, we are basically in the same situation as in the last lecture when we analyzed monetary policy, expansionary monetary policy, which means there the nominal value of money was increased by the central bank by printing more money. And this was the reason why real money supply was growing, causing a lower interest rate. Now, nominal money supply is constant, but the price level is falling such that the real value of money grows. We can buy more goods for the same amount of nominal money. And now this is causing the decrease of the interest rate. Everything which follows now is just as we analyzed in the last lecture when we discussed expansionary monetary policy. So the following is nothing but a repetition of the last lecture. Okay, nevertheless, let's go on. Now the lower interest rate means that we will invest more. The old investment level was 10, now the new investment level is 5 units higher, so it's 50. That's the first or the primary effect of this reduction of the price level. Now this higher investment credit demand will now be used to buy more investment goods, and consequently this will now spill over to the market for goods. The old investment level of 10 that leads to this total demand curve will no longer be given. Instead, we will have a higher investment level of 15, so the demand curve will move upward. Total demand curve will now be on this level with higher investment. This means that the new intersection point with the 45-degree line lies here, and as a result GDP will jump from 20 units to 30 units. This is now the consequence of the decrease in prices. We have more demand for goods, and under Keynesian assumptions, as always, that is what we have called Keynes' law, firms will produce more goods, adjust their production to the demand, and this means they will also need more workers, and therefore we get rid of Keynesian unemployment. So the economy is able to jump back into a full employment mode in the long run. Even the Keynesian economy is able to do this. However, we know from our last lecture that we are now not yet fully described the adjustment process. We have 10 units more GDP, which means under these conditions 10 units more income. So households will save more. They will not only invest more, they will also save more. Savings ratio is 50%, so 5 units of these 10 units will be saved. So we have to shift the savings function or the total credit function to the right by 5 units. This will now be our new total credit supply. And now, as we know, the interest rate would fall, but we have also to take care that since we have more GDP, we have more transactions, and if we have more transactions, we will need more transaction money, so money demand will also grow. For simplicity, we assume that money demand grows also by 5, so the length of one little quad. And if we shift now the money demand curve to the right by the length of one little quad, we have a new intersection point at the same interest level as before, and therefore investment demand will not grow or fall additionally, but stay on this level, which means we have now reached full equilibrium on the market for goods and the capital market. So we are back in a full employment equilibrium in the long run of the Keynesian model, just as we are in the neoclassical model. Consequently, the decrease in prices by firms causes a decrease in the interest rate, which causes an increase in investment, and this increase in investment causes in return an increase in the demand for goods, which leads ultimately to an increase in the demand for labor, such that Keynesian unemployment disappears. Let me again sum up this adjustment process verbally. Starting point of our analysis was a recession, which means a situation where firms had adjusted their supply of goods to a reduction in the demand for goods, while they kept their prices in the short run constant. This reduction in the supply of goods caused a reduction of GDP production below the full employment level. Therefore, the variable production costs of firms fall below the price of goods. And therefore, profit maximizing firms can, in the long run, increase their profits by lowering their prices. Consequently, when firms start with the adjustment of prices, they will lower their prices so that the price level of all goods decreases. This reduction of goods prices causes an increase in the real value of money offered by the central bank as a credit. If the denominator gets smaller, the fraction gets larger. Since money demand is offered as a credit on the credit market, this means real supply of credit increases, and this increase in the real supply lowers the interest rate so that investment of firms increases. This rise of investment causes an increase in the demand for investment goods, so that the total demand for goods increases too. Since firms adjust their supply of goods under Keynesian assumptions always to the demand for goods, they now raise their production of goods. Since a higher production of goods needs more labor input, firms demand also more labor on the labor market. Consequently, Keynesian unemployment shrinks and households receive more income. A higher household income causes now additionally households to consume more, so that the multiplier effect results and total demand grows finally stronger as just the initial increase of the investment demand. Consequently, the production of goods grows even more, and simultaneously the demand for labor grows more. When the production of goods has reached its normal level of capacity utilization, a further reduction of prices does not increase profits anymore, so firms stop lowering their prices. Finally, two secondary effects must be taken into account. On one hand, the increase in GDP causes an increase of household income and hence household savings. So total credit supply grows additionally. On the other hand, the increase in GDP causes a higher transaction volume, so the transaction demand for money grows also. This means that on the capital market, credit supply grows and credit demand grows. And if we make the assumption that both grow by the same amount, the interest rate stays constant. If the increase in credit supply were stronger than the increase in credit demand, a further decrease in the interest rate would evolve, which would cause a further increase in investment demand. So this process would hold on until the increase in money demand is sufficient to absorb the increase in credit supply. After this adjustment process has taken place, the economy is in a new equilibrium without unemployment. So, this analysis shows that the Keynesian model also works when prices are flexible. And the results are very similar to the results of the neoclassical model. In the long run, if prices are adjusted, a market economy can overcome a recession on its own. Does not need necessarily help from the government or the central bank. Well, of course, one only has to wait 1 year on average until prices get flexible. So the Keynesian model shows that the self-healing capacities of markets need more time if prices are not as flexible as in the neoclassical model. And this is, of course, a very important contribution of John Maynard Keynes to macroeconomic theory. He has helped to understand the macroeconomic adjustment processes in the long and in the short run. John Maynard Keynes is, of course, the guy which is celebrated here, and if you want to, you find additional information about his life and work in this issue of the Business Week, which can be downloaded under this link. If you ask me now whether this is relevant for the written examination, the answer is no, it's not relevant. Okay, so much for this lesson. In the next lesson, we will talk about some practical problems of Keynesian economic policy.